Hi, thank you all for joining. I'm Carol Fabrizio, Chief Communications and Marketing Officer for USA Gymnastics. We are honored to be hosting this series of panels on diversity, equity, inclusion, and bias in gymnastics, and we're especially honored to host these incredible panelists today. This summer, after the tragic killings of George Floyd, Breonna Taylor, and others, we made a commitment to our community to be better and do more in the fight for racial and social justice. These panels are a part of that commitment. Over the last several years, we've been working to transform our organization and put safety first. But safety isn't just about freedom from physical abuse or harm. Safety also means having an environment that is psychologically and emotionally safe as well. And that means having a culture and a community that is not only diverse and accepting, but also inclusive and equitable. And we know that to create that kind of community and culture, it starts with listening. So that's what we're here to do today, to listen to and learn from the experiences and ideas of some of our community members. So to start the panel today, I'm going to ask each of our panelists to just spend a couple minutes introducing themselves, and then have our esteemed moderator, Dr. Harrison, introduce himself and get the conversation started. Throughout the panel, you can use the Q&A function to submit any questions you might have, and I'll try to work those into the conversation. So without further ado, I will start and ask Steve Butcher to introduce himself.
Hello, everyone. Hello from Switzerland. My name is Steve Butcher, and I actually work in Switzerland for the International Gymnastics Federation, where I serve as their sports director, providing leadership to all 7 gymnastics disciplines worldwide. And I'm fortunate that I got my real start with USA Gymnastics. I am what I consider to be in the past as an average gymnast, a good coach, and probably even better judge. I've judged 3 Olympic Games. In Rio, I was a chief men's judge as the men's technical president. With USA Gymnastics, I've served on the executive committee, board of directors, and men's program committee. And I've had US athletes on the national team and athletes from 3 other countries as well. And I'm happy to be with everyone and looking forward to the open discussion.
Great, thanks, Steve. Wendy, if you wouldn't mind going next.
Certainly. Hello, everybody from Harlem, New York City. So my start in gymnastics, I don't know if most people know this, I was actually a tumbler first, okay? I had a tumbling team, and then I went from tumbling to artistic gymnastics, and then I went to rhythmic gymnastics. So I actually have been a participant in all 3 of those disciplines, but rhythmic gymnastics was my forte, where I made the national team for 9 years. I was the first Black to compete in rhythmic for the US. After I competed, I went on to become a coach. I was a national team coach. And my athlete, Alian Backrow Wilson, made the 1996 group team. She actually married Blaine Wilson. A lot of gymnastics up in here where I come from. So during that time, though, after I retired, I did serve on the board of USA Gymnastics as the chair of the Athletes Council. I eventually became vice president on the executive committee. I also served at the USOPC now, representing gymnastics. I did a lot of performing. I did a lot of TV commentating. I performed on Broadway using my gymnastics skills. And then after that, I became president of the Women's Sports Foundation. I was the first Black and the first gymnast to represent the Women's Sports Foundation as president. And then I started my gymnastics foundation, the Wendy Hilliard Gymnastics Foundation, which has served, as you hear us in New York, I know you hear it outside. Anyway, we've served over 20,000 youth in free and low-cost gymnastics in Harlem, and also my hometown of Detroit, where I started the foundation there 5 years ago. So I'm so happy to be here today, and I'm really grateful to USA Gymnastics for having this platform. Thank you.
Thanks, Wendy, appreciate it. Isis, do you want to go next?
Hi, everyone. My name is Isis Lowry. I was a gymnast here at Oregon State from 2016 to 2020. Before that, I was an elite gymnast back in Australia, where I'm originally born and raised. I got my master's, not yet, I'm currently getting my master's in education here at OSU, and I am also a volunteer student coaching this year with the women's gymnastics team. So that's my little resume. I don't quite have as much yet as everyone else, as I'm just starting the next phase outside of gymnastics, but I am super excited to be here and really just get to know everyone and use this platform for good.
Thanks, Isis. And Jasmine?
Hi, everyone. Good morning, good afternoon, good evening. Steve, thank you all for joining. My name is Jasmine Swinigan Bedford, and I am currently located in Minnesota. I did gymnastics all through JO level 10, and then I competed on the Iowa State gymnastics team. Couldn't get enough of the sport. So when I moved to Chicago, I became a gymnastics judge. So I've been judging for about a decade. Women's artistic, I judge compulsory, optional, excel, and then NCAA divisions 1 through 3. I'm currently the only Black judge in the state of Minnesota who judges in the NCAA, and I'm one of 3 Black judges in the state of Minnesota. So I'm really excited to be here to kind of represent women's artistic gymnastics judging, and I'm really grateful to USAG and to everybody else on the panel for giving us this opportunity. So thank you. Really looking forward to the conversation.
Thanks, Jasmine. Dr. Herson, I will turn it over to you.
Thank you, Carol. In the USAG, thank you for having all of us. I'm really excited. If we were in person with this esteemed panel, I would high five everyone down the line. So I just did that. Let's jump into it. We don't have as much time as we'll probably need. So we've heard throughout this conversation we're having about race relations. And we know at times we can be polarized or just there's misunderstanding. Well, we want to have collective thought. So when we think about diversity, equity, and inclusion panel, how are these terms important to you and how do you define each of those words? Anyone jump in?
You know, I'll start. I would say gymnastics, of course, is diverse just because of the sport, right? To participate in any discipline, you have to be able to do a lot of different things to make it right. And that's diversity, bringing a lot of things together. Also, our sport is inherently open to criticism and bias just because it's a judge sport. Love you judges over there, but that's how our sport works. So it's always going to be an issue of someone seeing something some way and another person seeing something another way. So that's what our sport's about. But the one thing I do want to say as far as the sport of gymnastics is because it's such a specific artistic sport, the focus is so detailed. All in gymnastics should respect anyone who's on that level because they know how much work it took to become a good gymnast. There's just no way around it. You just can't luck into doing gymnastics well. And so it should be appreciated across the board. It should also note that I really do think the gymnastics community can do better and be a representative because of the sport, what we do. We all work hard. We all appreciate these details to make the sport look great. And I think if you look to that, it keeps it much more open to everyone because Steve will tell you, other judges, gymnastics has a history of some crazy old stuff between the Russian judges over here, the East Germans back in the day. I mean, it's just part of our DNA as a sport to have that kind of conflict. But when it comes to race, it should be something else because especially if we're all here as American, we all want to do the best.
Excellent, Wendy, excellent. Diversity of judges. You opening my mind.
I'm gonna jump in. I think, so I'm actually studying like a lot of this stuff. So I'm able to really have different perspectives because obviously I've experienced it for one side and then hearing and learning about it and like in the institutional setting has been really, really interesting. But one thing we talk about is how like diversity is who's at the table. So who's actually there, who's in the room, who's competing, who's judging. And for me, like growing up in Australia, not a whole lot of diversity there. So my entire career, I never came across another Black gymnast, especially within the elite stream. Not African-American at least, I'm biracial. But yeah, so that was something that I grew up and I was like, oh yeah, like it's cool, like whatever. But I've never came across a Black judge either. Like that never even crossed my mind. It was never even like, where are all the Black judges? It didn't even, I was like, well, it doesn't matter. Like they just don't exist or I haven't been in that situation. And even when I came to school here, like same thing, like I don't think, or not that I remember. And I think that I would have remembered that because it would have been a real like impactful, like, oh wow, like that's awesome to see that. And I don't think I've ever seen that before. But then I think inclusion is, well, who has a voice? Like it's not just who's here, but then who has a voice and who feels like they're allowed to have a voice. And when they do say something, is it actually being taken on board, or is it just like, oh, cool, okay, thank you, and then nothing? Because I think that's really important when we're provided with spaces. It's one thing to feel like it's actually going to, like, it's something's going to come from it, rather than just, well, we'll have you speak on behalf of all Black people everywhere. So that's like, okay, we've got that one Black girl there, she can kind of speak for everyone, and then cool, we did it. Like that tokenism piece. So that's kind of my take on diversity and inclusion, and really like not just who's there, but who's part of it, who's part of the conversation, and who's really contributing, and who feels like they can contribute.
No, Isis, your experience about rarely seeing the judges, diversity of participants. It reminds me of my first experience was 20-some years ago, and I had some students in Michigan performing at a gymnastics event. And I walked in, and there literally was 2 people of color there, me and a gymnast from UMass Amherst, and he kind of gave me the cultural nod, so to speak, and we both laughed, and he was literally getting ready to perform. And so those are the types of things I just want to move us forward. How do we think diversity and inclusion has changed over time with gymnastics? If Steve or Jasmine want to follow up.
I'm happy to say something about that. I mean, we definitely, it's very easy to tell just by the photos of the national teams over the years in the US that you can see that we have a major change in diversity. And then think of all the Olympic titles, especially in artistic gymnastics, that have been won over these past years. But I always like to think back to a friend of mine in a South American country who asked me about 10 years ago, in the US, do you try to have like a few Hispanics, some white, some Black, and a mix of people? Is this part of your selection procedure? I said, no, that's just the representation of our country. And it shows that we are really welcoming gymnasts from all races to be a part of the national team and to be judged fairly to make the national team and compete on the international floor. And just to add to that, although I work as a sports director for the International Federation, I don't represent any views of the Federation in this chat today, but I can say that I'm very proud that across all of our disciplines, our top authorities we have at the international level, they are conscious and want to be sure that it does not matter what race someone is. They want to make sure that they're judged fairly. They also now, all of us make a big emphasis at the international level that we don't care what country you're from. We want to be sure that the best athletes win. But we have a lot of groundbreakers throughout the sport, different races, and especially the African-American gymnasts that have done so well over the past few years. I think that it rids the sport of some of the implicit bias, which I know we'll discuss later, that could be mentioned related to judging.
Thanks,
Steve. That's great. I'll just kind of piggyback off of that. One thing that I've noticed that has changed, Dr. Keith, Dr. Harrison, is we are talking about this, right? We're talking about diversity, equity, inclusion, and bias. And when I was a gymnast, that was just not even a conversation that we thought that we could have. Similar to Isis, when I was a gymnast, I looked out in the crowd, I looked at, all of my coaches, all of my, anyone who had authority in the sport, and it was pretty white. And I grew up in Minnesota, so I just kind of learned to expect that. But still, it was still something that I carried with me throughout my entire experience. And now there's 3 Black judges in the state of Minnesota, and it's not huge, but it's something, right? And we do have some Latino judges as well. And so, our numbers are increasing. And then also, USAG is hosting these conversations where we can finally have these more raw conversations about diversity and equity and bias. And I'm doing this in Minnesota with the judges in Minnesota as well, where we're finally just at a point where we are willing to kind of think about this, look within, and think about what we can do to be, the best advocates that we can be in the gymnastics arena.
This group is pushing us toward, we're going to jump to implicit bias, which we might not get to any other questions. I'll do my best after this. But what I want to do, if everyone will just bear with me, is just take about 2 to 3 minutes to give an overview of implicit bias, just so everyone has a baseline context. Implicit bias is a concept and phenomenon of unconscious judgments and assessments based on stereotypical notions, misunderstandings, and very limited information. I want to give us two examples where implicit bias raised its, ugly head. If you look at the Raptors, when they won the NBA championship last year, and their GM came down from the suite, and he's trying to get on the floor, and maybe his badge isn't exactly showing, and he got pushed by a security guard who happened to be a white male. And others can Google it on their own time. It's a huge lawsuit, a huge mess. And you think about, we're all competitive. Those of us in particular have been athletes or leaders. And at the height of something so special, he had to deal with implicit bias that person didn't think that particular security guard, not every security guard, didn't think that they belonged. I was thinking about the judges, in particular, Steve. Procter & Gamble has a great commercial going dealing with implicit bias. It shows an African-American male walking throughout town. He's getting microaggressed, and then the commercial ends, he's walking into the courtroom to be a judge. And so that's more positive twist. In terms of sport, there's different levels that people study implicit bias. One is stereotype threat. So Claude Steele was a famous professor at Stanford who studied standardized tests, and he found when you reminded women of their gender, they did worse on the science, the STEM portion of the tests, science, technology, engineering, and math, whereas with race, people of color did worse on the test when you reminded them of their race. So these things get primed with race, you remind them of race or IQ. And then quickly, Jeff Stone followed that work and looked at golf studies and basketball. And when he told blacks that they're natural athletes, they did better versus when they told whites they did worse. And I'm just taking everyone through, there's a huge body of implicit bias research in sport. And then he did the same with free throw shooting. And then quickly, my own work, I looked at testing situations in the classroom with student athletes. I think it's interesting to note African-American male student athletes did best on aptitude tests when reminded implicitly that they were athletes. So that reinforcement of being a baller helped. A bit of irony, the person that created the term microaggressions was a former black football player, Dr. Chester Pierce at Harvard. Dr. Pierce was a football player. He's the first person of color to play beyond the Mason-Dixon line in 1947 against Virginia, Harvard, Virginia. And he ended up getting his MD, consulting at Sesame Street. He also helped build the work of childism, which relates to some of the issues USAG is addressing with young gymnasts. And there's a great children's book called Follow Chester, and I want to give a shout out to his teammates as I end this overview. Many of his teammates, well, all of them at the time were white. They would have Chester go into segregated places and they would follow him and say, so the concept was we're going to follow Chester on the field and off the field. So I hope that wasn't too lengthy, but I just wanted to get everyone a context how much work is being done on implicit bias. So panel, how have you all experienced implicit bias throughout your experiences personally, professionally, athletically, or academically?
Okay, where do we start? So here's the thing. And any Black person in America, or actually now around the world, deals with it on a regular basis, whether it's doing gymnastics or going to the grocery store. I'm raising two Black sons who are very, very accomplished, but they're not seen as that as they go out into the world. One of my athletes is like a junior elite tumbler. The other one is a bassoon playing fencer, and they're no danger to anybody. BJ's not going to be flipping his way in any trouble with anything. So they're not looked at when they go out. And that's the pressure that I have to have as a mother of two Black children, raising them in America. That's a reality. So that implicit bias, when you take this to the sport of gymnastics, I had a very interesting upbringing in my sport because my coaches were for the former Soviet Union. They were from the Ukraine, but they were Jewish. And the only reason they were up in here in the United States in the 1980s is because they were Jewish, because they had such bias in the Soviet Union against Jews. So their take on teaching us gymnastics in the city of Detroit. It's such a interesting, we had these white Jewish Soviet coaches and all these black gymnasts. And it was interesting that we had such a comfort because their mind they didn't grow up in America, right? So they didn't learn about all of that discrimination, all that they came with, right? So we were treated differently actually because they were from Eastern Europe. But you know, it was interesting, and this I think a lot of athletes, elite athletes, can testify to. As an athlete, I found it harder to get good scores in America on the national level. When I would compete internationally, I would tend to get better scores. And it was very interesting to me that it wasn't a situation where my color was appreciated, right, internationally, as opposed to kind of, I felt, holding me back in the US. And so I think many artists do this. I think many other athletes can deal with this. So what it is exposure. A lot of it has to do, especially in the sport of gymnastics. There are not a lot of Blacks taking gymnastics. Gymnastics tends to be a very suburban or rural sport. So that's one of the things. When you're not around people, you don't understand it about how they operate. But I'll just tell you, it's constant. And it is in our sport. And as you mentioned before, it's just about education and respect.
Thank you, Wendy. Others?
I can go.
Okay.
Wendy, thank you so much for that. And thank you for, just sharing all of your experiences. I definitely resonated with certain things that you said. While I didn't compete internationally, I did compete throughout the country. And I went for 10 years, I was at a very small gym. And so I felt that there was some level of implicit bias, both because of my race and because of the gym that I went to. And so I would notice that my scores would change depending on my location. And I always had that in the back of my head, like, wow, I wonder if I went to X club, or I wonder if I looked a certain way, if my scores would get better. And I remember at one point when I was in high school, I had other coaches who made a lot of comments about my body. And I'm not going to say anything that's profound or that's not that other people can't relate to. But, my coaches were really focused on how I looked in a leotard. And I was always being compared to my white teammates, even though I actually did have a Black teammate. I was not compared to her ever. I was always compared to the white teammates. You need to look thinner, you need to look smaller. And so I always felt like, for a couple of reasons, both because of just the color of my skin, even though I'm not that dark, I'm certainly darker than a lot of people, the color of my skin and the shape of my body, that was being, I internalized that, and it was negatively affecting, I always thought that it was negatively affecting my scores. And then, in addition to that, I have 2 master's degrees, and just outside of the sport, I do face a lot of people who kind of look at me and they're like, really? You really do? You really have 2 master's degrees? Oh, you went to that school? Are you sure? And I don't notice that among my, my peers who have 2 master's degrees or have PhDs. It's just something that's celebrated, or it's just something that they have. But, I always have to wonder, right? Like, if I looked differently, would it be normal for me to have 2 master's degrees? And that's something that I carry that with me everywhere I go. I feel like I always have to do a little bit more to prove myself, which I do, but it does get tiring after a while. And I take that when I judge as well, especially the comments about how I look in a leotard. I make sure to change my language when I'm approaching other gymnasts, when I'm going into the gym to do consults, or when I'm talking to coaches or whatever it is. I'm very focused on the quality of the performance and how to make the performance better, as opposed to how the gymnast looks in the leotard. And I've found that has been really helpful for all gymnasts and coaches if we just, continue to work on our language and the way that we're approaching how we evaluate gymnastics.
No, and Jasmine, following you and Wendy, just a thought, implicit bias has practically been, the comparison is it's like a drippy faucet just dripping on your head each day. Whereas Arthur Ashe, the famous tennis player and activist, said, it's like having another full-time job being Black in America. In terms of implicit bias with judging specifically, Steve, any thoughts on it, and ISIS as well, on how implicit bias impacts judging?
Well, the biggest thing about implicit bias is, and the ladies have said such great comments already about it, is that people of color feel it on a regular basis in society. Doesn't matter if you're in the United States or you're in Europe where I'm at. There's something that happens on a regular basis that's a trigger. Sometimes maybe it's not bias. Sometimes maybe it's not intentional. Many times it's not intentional, but it's there. And I know the question was about bias and implicit bias in judging. Whether it's race related or past competition experience in medals, it's there. It's a part of society. But speaking with a doctor that we use here that helps us do our studies on judging, he's done comparisons of race-related sports issues and just country bias. And he says when people learn and are told about the biases that they have, it's very easy to turn around the situation because the majority of people don't mean to be biased. We talked at the beginning about George Floyd and Breonna Taylor. Those are the shocking things that happen at the top of the iceberg. Implicit bias is below the surface. And that's what the majority of people of color feel. And I just want to add to what the ladies had said previously. The question was asked by Dr. Keith is, have you experienced any implicit bias? And I'd like to only talk about what I've experienced in gymnastics because these experiences stay with me even today. I remember when I took my first international judges examination, my roommate was the oldest judge, and he came back to the room later to tell me, after you took the exam, I heard them talking in the marking room, and the comment that was made is, no way that Black guy got that score. Somebody must have helped him. And he was so scared. He was preparing me so that if they questioned me, I said the right thing. I studied with him and nobody helped me. Well, that night and into the next morning until we got the results, I was afraid the start of my career as an international judge may be over, and I felt so threatened. And then you turn around and just a few years later, I'm judging Olympic trials in the US. And when we get out of the judges bus, I'm the last one to step off. Two people are running towards me. It's two police officers. They put their hands on me. We need to see your accreditation. We need to see your credential. And I was so shocked by that. It wasn't until another judge came out and said, Steve, we're starting the meeting. Where are you? I was 5 to 10 minutes late for the meeting because I was detained by the police. So they later came and apologized. And so I don't like to bring up situations that might be, maybe they were or maybe they were not biased. Doesn't mean that they were trying to actively be racist against me, but they were certainly biased and didn't think that I belonged in that place at that time. The fact that we had other police on motorcycles escort us to the arena, and the fact that I was dressed like everyone else should have been a tip-off that you don't put your hands on someone. But imagine having to judge in Olympic trials, 3 hours of judging, and through my mind, are they coming back to me? And are they going to report something to USA Gymnastics that hurts my career? These are things that people of color face, and I face many other incidents. These are just two in the sport of gymnastics. Every time now I go to an event and somebody wants to touch my credential, first thing in my thought, it brings me right back to that activity that happened so many years ago. And in Europe, trust me, people want to touch my accreditation, not the people around me. So these are things that people experience, and I thought it was important to mention these because a lot of people are in disbelief that implicit bias or any bias really exists, but it's there.
Absolutely. And people say, well, those are just anecdotes. Well, to Wendy's point, to start this implicit bias discussion, if 35 million African Americans and even more people of color all have one anecdote, how can it, at least one anecdote, how can it be anecdotal? And I think, Steve, you overcame that, but it's still, it impacts you, right? Regardless of what the reasoning was for them profiling you.
The most important point is a lot of people can allow that type of interaction to bring them down. I've chosen over my life that when these incidents happen, that I've got to be better. I've got to rise above it. You threaten me and make me think that I didn't do well on the judge's examination and maybe I cheated. okay, next few examinations, I'm going to show you how well I'm going to study and how much better I'm going to be than everyone else. And how fortunate was I to be the top men's gymnastics judge in the world at the last Olympic Games. So you have to use it as motivation. You cannot use it to bring you down. But unfortunately, it does bring so many people down because some people cannot handle that, as you call it, Dr. Keith, drip, drip, drip on a regular basis.
Thank you, Steve. And a segue to you, Isis, before we move on to equity and eventually questions from in the Q&A kiosk. Isis, maybe a silver lining to round this up. How do you approach overcoming implicit bias, and maybe a success story of how you've overcome it? Or and if you want to give a context to some of the negative aspects, please go ahead.
Yeah, so I actually really resonated with what Jasmine was saying, and being compared to a lot of like our white teammates. So like I said, like in my gym, it was really just me and my sister. But there was another girl, another black girl who was training elite, and we would go to competitions together. And it just so happened to be that our dads played basketball together. So they knew each other. And I remember I just always felt like I would really play into the expectations other people had set. So like, for example, like a lot of people be like, oh, like black gymnast, like she's probably really powerful or strong. So they would be like, you know, she's got that build and she's going to be great at this, this, and this. So for me, I had crippling fears on those power events, floor and vault. And I was like, well, I'm supposed to be like good at these, but I'm so scared. Like, oh my goodness. And it was like things like that where I would be like, well, if they're expecting me to be like this, like I'm not supposed to be good at bars because I don't have the body for bars. Like I don't look like a pencil in a handstand. Like I can't get my butt under. So like, I'm not going to get judged right, but it's like, that's my body type. But I was trying to look like type A when I was not, that was not my build. And as a young girl, that was something that played into, you know, where that's where the body image piece comes in. Cause it's like, well, if every other gymnast looks like that, and I look like this, I can't be as good as this person. So for me, that's something that I struggled with, and I was able to overcome a lot of like things in terms of body image and that type of thing. But this other gymnast that I did mention, this other black girl, she was had a complete opposite body type than me. My dad's 5'11", her dad's 6'9", like, and beyond. Her legs went for days, her arms went for days. She was great at pretty much every event, but I remember looking at her and I had these implicit biases of like, well, wait a minute, like, isn't she meant to be like really powerful too? Because everyone says I'm meant to be powerful and like, we're both black. So like, so for me growing up in that environment where it was like being white and being tall and skinny or like small and skinny was the norm, it was like, well, why don't I look like that? So for me, I think that I really tried to turn that into like my own, like into a positive thing where it was like, well, instead of being like, oh, like my legs are bigger than hers or like this is bigger than this, like, it was, well, okay, well, these legs allow me to do these skills and like this body allows me to perform this way. And then it wasn't until I came to college where I was really able to like use that as fuel in like a really positive and empowering way for other people. Because when I came to college, that's when I realized the enormity of my platform. And I actually had a parent come up to me and she was like, thank you for being like such a great role model for my daughter. And I was like, oh my gosh, like, thank you. And, you know, I've heard that a few times before, as many, you know, elite or college gymnasts have just with that platform. But I saw a daughter and she was also biracial. And I looked at her and I like, it brought tears to my eyes because I was like, oh, like that was me. Because she didn't like have that person to look up to. And especially to where it's like, because most people might look at Simone Biles or someone like that and be like, I could never be like that. Like that is just so beyond like, that's just insane what she's doing. Like I couldn't do that. But I think when you can actually like meet someone that resonates with you in that way, it's just so impactful. And I didn't have that. So I never went to a competition like and saw someone at that level and be like, wow. I remember there was one girl and she wasn't black, but she had curly hair. She had slightly tan skin and her hair was slightly curly, like not my curls. And I remember waiting in line to get her autograph and then they ended up being like, nope, like time's up. And I was like, and my mom was like, no, like my mom realized how important it was for me to talk to this girl because she had curly hair, not anything else, but because my mom saw the fact that this woman, like this young girl resonated with me that hard because of our hair. She's like, no. So I think it was things like that, just like the expectations of what I needed to be or what I should be. And what I was supposed to look like. really affected me, but I was able to overcome that and really step into that and embrace those differences. Because when I got to college, it was like, look at the diversity amongst college gymnastics. And I think that's what really gravitated me towards it, especially like, you know, an elite. It's not like, especially in a different country, they don't want you to like go all the way through the elite stream and then go to a different country and like go compete. That's not what's recommended. So when I did it, I didn't realize what I was coming into, but I was like, this is where I need to be. Different body types, different colors, different, like just everyone embracing who they were. And I think that was just a really, really positive thing. And then being able to see the impact that I could have on other young gymnasts, that to me, I was like, okay, this is exactly where I'm supposed to be. And this is what kind of impact I can have. Imagine what I can do outside of the sport. Like, I don't necessarily want to be a judge, but I can only imagine, Jasmine, like the impact you've had on so many little girls before they salute, being like, oh my gosh, like, that's cool. Rather than, oh, like, okay. So yeah, that was kind of a long-winded spiel, but there's been like a few different incidences or a few different situations where I've really experienced it, not understood it, and then now looking back, being able to dissect it and be like, oh, that's why I thought like that. And it's okay to feel like that.
I think it's awesome. From Australia to Corvallis, I visited Corvallis, that you use that land grant, Pac-12 school in the middle of nowhere to impact the people that you did. Carol, did you want to jump in and ask anything? I know things are heating up in the Q&A. I just wanted to see if Carol wanted to.
Sure. Thanks, Dr. Harrison. There was a great question about how we can address the socioeconomic barriers to further diversifying the sport. And I know that, Wendy, you've addressed this a little bit. So I was wondering if maybe you would start with that.
Well, it's really having access to sport. And I think that people need to start thinking, and it's better for the sport of gymnastics to have more people have access. Because we went to the private gym club model, a lot of the YMCAs and the other community organizations that used to do gymnastics don't necessarily do gymnastics anymore. And so I would say a lot of people ask me that. And the first thing is just to either get your coaches out or invite kids to come in the gym so they can try gymnastics. It's totally a lot of fun. And it's way a lot more fun for both the coaches and the kids if they get to try something that they never get to see. So it's a really rewarding way to serve the sport of gymnastics. And I will say, especially what Isis was talking about, in my gymnastics foundation, and what's unusual about it is that most of the kids are brown and black, which 75% black, 25% Hispanic. The staff is the same way. And so it's an environment where it's very rare that you do this in gymnastics. And my coaches are top coaches, former national team, level 10 gymnasts. I mean, they're the top because I was always committed to doing good gymnastics. But some of the parents come to me and they'll be coming from far away. It's a community group. I want people to be able to walk, but some people find us and I say, well, how can we come into my gym? And they're like, because I needed my daughter to feel comfortable. I needed her to be around other little black girls that's doing beginning gymnastics, that their teachers could talk to them. I mean, when we talk about it's like so many things, it's your hair, right? I'm sure, Ice, you probably got this. Like, are you gonna put your hair up in a bun? How are you gonna wear it? Can the coach put your hair up? I mean, it is like so big when you don't have people that understand how you are. And so just the fact that people wanna come take gymnastics in an environment where everybody else looks like them makes you enjoy it more and you don't have to deal with that stress. So getting back to the socioeconomic, I would say the key is that there's a basic gymnastics that's wonderful. There's elite gymnastics, which is great, but basic gymnastics is a lot of fun. General gymnastics, sports acrobat, all these things. And I think people need to embrace that more so that people will enjoy the joy of gymnastics.
And I just want to add to that great question. SES, socioeconomic status, a part of it. I'd like to hear from the rest of the panelists, and this is based on some research me and others have done. When we look at why students play different sports, SES isn't always the #1 factor. And Wendy just hit it. It's fun. What's popular, what's cool, what products, sneakers, pop culture. So can other panelists, can you speak to how do we increase the diversity and inclusion with USAG through participants outside of the barriers of funding?
Well, I think, as Wendy was saying, representation is really important. And also making sure, another thing that I was thinking about is there are a lot of small clubs throughout the country, and a lot of those small clubs are, they're run by 3 to 4 coaches, and maybe they don't have the funding to go to all of the training that they need so that they can be, the safest, most educated, best fit coaches for those kids in those areas. And I feel like we really rely on those smaller clubs to provide a lot of opportunities to our gymnasts, both, basic through competitive. A lot of those smaller clubs tend to be a little bit more financially feasible. And it's not like a one-to-one, but I would say in general, that's the case. So within Minnesota, I've kind of just taken it upon myself to be incredibly transparent in my judging, and to also work to find ways to get those coaches educated in ways that aren't going to break their banks, so that they can continue to provide the excellent programming at a price that is really, feasible for those gymnasts. So just kind of to piggyback off of that, I show up in spaces. I show up as much as I can. I am as personable as I can be. I am as professional and as educated as I can be, so that I can help those coaches and those gymnasts understand, A, I'm on their side, B, I'm definitely in favor of a more diverse and inclusive system, and C, I really want them to thrive. And I want those gymnasts right now who are like 14, 15, 16 years old, who are looking to see what's next, or who maybe want a side gig when they're in college. I want them to judge. I want to help with that. So on the judging side, I'm working on we're really pushing for like different mentorship programs. And I, personally think it would be great if we could target a more diverse audience. And I think it's a cycle, and it goes at all levels, as Wendy was saying, from the bottom up. We need to find ways to represent, and we need to find all of those corners and little pockets where we can better represent, so that we can make it fun and equitable and accessible for people, both financially and socially.
Thank you.
Dr. Keith, can I say something about this issue as well?
Absolutely, Steve.
One of the things that is a big difference from the United States compared to other countries, particularly European countries, our sports model in the United States is that sports for youth is a huge industry, and it costs money. And to be very good and at a high level, it costs a lot of money. And it's just the opposite in Europe. I mean, you get up to a decent level and everything's taken care of for you. And it's the same in other countries throughout the world. So our model for sports, all sports, is based on you have to have an income of some substance to reach a high level. Doesn't matter what sport it is. And I think that, unfortunately, there's positives and negatives. The positives are you have very, very good youth programs to produce lots of star athletes. The negative side is maybe you miss out on several athletes because they're talented, but the parents just don't have the resources to get them to a high level. That's what I see as the biggest problem with sports, and getting people that don't have a high economic situation to progress in sport.
Thank you for pointing out the structural differences. Isis, did you want to add anything?
I was going to say that I think with gymnastics, we all know it's expensive. That's definitely something I didn't know when I was younger, because what kid is thinking about that? It's like, I want a new leotard. And it's like, okay, well, you're going to pay for that that GK leotard? You want how many of them? And now that I'm older, I was like, no wonder my parents were like, let's just calm down. Like, first of all, you don't need that many. Let's just progress. But that's what I think a lot of people don't understand, that gymnastics isn't just for those who want to do elite and those who want to do college. Gymnastics is fun, and it is so, I think people only think that you can only do it at that intensity. And I think that for all of us, we've competed at, some of those highest levels, and yeah, that's fun for us. Like, I loved competing in every aspect I loved it. I'm like, I'm not just going to go train 30 hours a week and then just show my friends I can do a cartwheel in the backyard. I'm like, I worked hard for this. But some kids, they just want to learn how to do a cartwheel, or they just want to learn how to do a forward roll. Like, it's nothing, like, they're not going to dedicate their life to it. And I think that if we could make that accessible to everyone, not just the elite and not just the college system, because back home it was more like we don't have that collegiate system. You have to go away to get it. So it's like, well, if you're not going to make the Olympics, like, okay, like, you'll just do levels and then, okay, cool. And for me, I was like, well, I want to go to the Olympics. I want to be able to do that stuff. But I think that people also underestimate the benefits of gymnastics. Like the fundamentals you learn in gymnastics, like I always say, like whenever I have a child, whenever that may be, they're doing gymnastics until they can say, I don't want to do it. Because it is so, like, it's so great. It's so structurally, like my mom's actually we call it kinder gym, but my mom's a coach. She coaches the babies, and she's like, it is so important for them. Like she'll get kids coming in with certain things going on, and their doctors or their pathologists, that's not the right word. You know what I'm trying to say? Like what a pediatrician. And I was like, you know, the pediatricians are like, go take gymnastics for a term and then come back. And so many things have been able to help them because like gymnastics is more than just learning how to do cartwheels and backflips. The balance, the coordination, speed, agility, all of that stuff can help with every other sport. And I think that once people realize it's not just glitter, sparkles, leotards, Olympics, all of that, like the intense, rigorous training, that it's so much more than that. It's like, oh, okay, that's really cool. Like gymnastics can help with basketball, with football, with tennis, with diving, with like so many things. And that's what I think people like overlook when it comes to gymnastics, because what's on TV? The Olympics and the NCAA championships. Mm-hmm. It's not just like, oh yeah, like the fun high school gymnastics is going on. It's always at that level of intensity. So I think that if we can show, you know, not just America, but all over the world that it's accessible in terms of like, you can really do gymnastics anywhere. Like walking along the little like curb of the street, like you're on a beam, you know, like you don't have to physically buy the GK leotards and the grips and all of that stuff to be able to learn some of the things that we do within the sport. But I think it's great, Wendy, that you do have those programs for those people that, you know, don't have access, because not every single corner of the world has a gym, like a full-on, like a full-fledged gymnasium. You can go out and practice dribbling whenever you want, but you can't necessarily do a bar routine in the middle of the street. So then there are those things that we do need to take into consideration as well.
Before I throw a lob back to Carol and she chimes in, all the panelists, I'm learning so much, but I have to say in 6th grade, I had tumbling. And after that, all the marketing that I saw that was cool was for football and men's basketball. So what did I end up playing? College football, high school football, and basketball. So as USAG evolves, I just think if there was the cool factor, if I saw someone growing up like Steve, who was in a Jordan commercial and had that, all that twist, turn, swag, whatever you want to call it, I just want to continue to push our thinking that, you know, 16 million African Americans are upper middle class. And so many are not participating in gymnastics, has zero to do with SES. SES is a part of the bowl that we're making the cake, yes, but I want to continue to push us on pop culture and what's the cool factor. Carol?
Yeah, great, Dr. Harrison, thank you. Another question that came up a lot was on the importance of having diversity in judging and how we can recruit and retain more judges who are people of color. So I know we have a lot of judges here, so would love to throw that question out on how we can improve those efforts.
Okay, Jasmine.
Oh, okay. Steve, I'm gonna pass it to you in a minute. So I will say, so there is another organization on the judging side, the National Association of Women's Gymnastics Judges, also called NAJ. I am on the board for the Minnesota NAJ, and then I've also been in contact with the National NAJ office, and I know a couple of those folks are actually in the audience, so I'm really glad they're here so they can hear this conversation. We've been working on just kind of kickstarting some diversity and inclusion initiatives, one of them obviously being how can we get more judges of color to represent throughout the states. One idea that I have for them that is, we are really at the very beginning of this, so more to come. But I think just having a mentorship program, both, you know, for judges of color and just for anybody to start judging, because it is a little ambiguous. But I think that first year of judging, it's really expensive. The first year that I judged, I was told by multiple other judges, don't expect to make money that first year. And it's really hard to get someone to commit to doing something and putting all of that money and time into, you know, studying for the test, taking the test, potentially traveling to take the test, knowing that you're likely not going to make money that first year. So if we can find ways to make those, you know, that first year a little bit more financially feasible and potentially profitable, like getting people, you know, in the green by a little bit, that would be really helpful. But also just having a judge of color mentor you throughout that first year. Say, hey, how did that first meet go? What questions do you have? Let's practice judge together. Let's see how we can talk through different situations together. I think that's going to be really key. And especially in a COVID world where everyone is working a lot more virtually, it's going to be really key to find ways to make those more personal connections so that we can increase the representation of the BIPOC folks on the judging side. Steve, what do you got?
Well, my comment was just going to be a general comment that, and I can't tell you how many times in my career as a judge, especially in the United States, from the lowest level to the elite level, how many parents and gymnasts have come to me and said, by seeing you on the floor, I feel more reassured that my Black child is being judged fairly. I don't have that same level of confidence without seeing your face there. And it may be unrealistic and they may be wrong about it, but perception is reality. If they perceive that maybe their child is not going to get a fair shake, then it's important to show diversity in the judging panel. It's a benefit for everyone. And I've been very happy that I've been able to have people feel relaxed. But the most important thing is, what can we do to improve? And I know the Men's Judges Association in the US, they're already trying to figure out what can they do to help promote and bring judges along. In my career as a judge in the United States, I really worked hard to mentor many judges. And I particularly would push some judges of color, not just Black judges, but Hispanic judges that were very good, to really push and motivate them to move forward. Kind of how Wendy Hilliard got me into leadership with USA Gymnastics. She said, you need to move forward. You need to help. You need to do more. It's mentoring and also trying to motivate people that they have an ability to help the Federation and help everyone of every race to move the Federation forward.
I love the mentoring concept, and we need a homogeneous mentoring, but heterogeneous too. We need everyone helping each other. Carol?
Sorry, still muted. Yeah, so I know we're getting close to time here because we just got about 6 minutes left, but I would love if everybody wouldn't mind sharing, all the panelists, just kind of your one piece of advice or takeaway for us on what we can all do in the community to further diversity, equity, inclusion in the sport. If we had to focus on one thing or prioritize it, what would it be?
You know, I will start, Carol, and I would say that gymnastics is poised to handle the situation. As the changes you've been talking about, the sport has been going through, we've had to pay attention to a lot of things and take careful, how you take care of your athletes, how you talk to your athletes, how you coach your athletes, the safety. All of that means that everyone has to step back and assess how they treat their athletes, how they treat each other. This is another part of that as a sport of gymnastics. So we can do that. When we talk about mentoring, oftentimes when I think about judges mentoring, I always think that, are you guys recruiting athletes? Because I usually like to see people that were athletes to be a judge. And so sometimes you want to recruit them. So that's the same type of thing if you want to have more diversity. If you want more, you have to actively go after people to encourage them and to support them. It's not rocket science here, guys. It's been a big problem for a long time. But as I said before, gymnastics and gymnasts, and especially coaches, because the coaches are training all these athletes. You guys know what's right and what to do. We just have to be more aware and make that movement forward.
Great.
Thanks, Wendy. Steve, you want to go next?
Certainly. The number one thing, and I said it earlier, is that if people realize in this time where we're trying to treat athletes better, if they realize that they have biases and everyone is working on trying to improve themselves, then I think this is going to help everyone. And it's this type of panel and this type of conversation is great in helping people to realize that we all need to improve. Not everybody's perfect. And every single one of us, even on this call, have biases. But if we realize them, we can do something about them. But I just want to add one more thing about bias. There's one really important thing, since we really spent a lot of time talking about Black athletes, and I hear it on the international floor all the time. I work with 7 disciplines, and there's always a critique about Black women's hair. And I can't tell you in how many newspapers and on social media, how many people criticize Simone Biles and also criticize Gabby Douglas. And even Black people criticize them. But everybody's got to understand, and I say it all the time, for a Black woman to take their hair from being natural and to try to make it so that it fits the profile of most gymnasts, they probably work 4 times as hard and spend a lot more money. It's a huge and delicate situation to talk about. But I wanted to bring it up because I even hear it on the international floor. And understand, it is not easy for Black athletes to make their hair conform to people that have straight hair. It's that simple.
Just real quick, that's probably going to be a whole panel topic. I just wanted to say that. Yeah.
Sorry to talk about hair.
I hear you.
So thanks, Steve. Appreciate that. Jasmine, you want to go next?
Sure. So I've been having a lot of conversations about race, both in the gymnastics world, in my work world, and in my personal world over the last few months. I mean, I have my whole life, but I think it's really been a big topic the last few months, especially since George Floyd, and living in, a pretty close proximity to that. This has really been something that I talk about all the time. My biggest piece of advice as we're having these conversations is for people to get comfortable being uncomfortable. Talking about diversity, talking about implicit bias, talking about all of this is really hard. It's hard work. It's hard work to make a change. And we can't make that change if our walls are up, if our defenses are up. That is one thing that I've faced quite a bit in having these conversations about diversity. A lot of people say, I'm not racist, so I don't know why you're talking to me about this. And I just want to challenge everybody, because as Steve has said, we all have our biases. I have biases. We cannot make a change unless we really think about it, sit back, and just, feel that discomfort and embrace it. So then we can work on making a change. And that's
thank you, Jasmine.
Advice. Yeah, thank you.
Beautifully said. Isis?
Can everyone hear me okay? It says my internet's unstable, so okay. I was like, this will be awkward. I would just say, especially to those who are in positions of power and have like a much louder and more prominent voice, to really listen to those that are either trying to say something or don't have the same platform to say what they need to say. Because I think oftentimes, especially in this sport, we're dealing with young children or like young adults, and they might not always feel like they have a space to be able to vocalize what it is that they feel like they need. And just because someone's 12 or 16, 17 doesn't mean that what they say isn't going to be valid. Because if a little girl, it could be as simple as like, can you do my hair in the middle of practice? And someone's like, oh, like, I don't really know how to. Or like, that could be them being like, no one here knows, I can't relate to anyone. So like, not only considering like, who are you hiring in the process, but like, is that person you're hiring, are they feeling welcome? Because retention is also important. You could hire a bunch of people. It's like, this is awesome, look who's at the table. But again, if they don't feel
I hate that we're not going to get to hear all her drop in knowledge. It is.
I know.
It's been great though.
Yeah, I know we're just at the end of our hour here, and poor Isis froze right before her point. But just a quick thank you to all of our panelists. You guys are amazing, and we're so appreciative for your honesty and openness and showing up and doing this for the whole community. And then to everybody who showed up, thank you for being a part of this. for caring about this. And I'll steal a little bit of what Jasmine said. If it made you a little uncomfortable, good. That's the idea with these conversations. I hope it also made you a little bit hopeful that we are starting to have these conversations at a broader level and that we are going to make progress together. So thank you so much for joining. This recording will be up on the website in the next couple weeks, and we hope to see you at the next one in November. Thank you, Dr. Harrison, too, for leading this wonderful panel.
Thank you. Y'all were excellent. What a squad. Thank you.
Yeah.
Thank
you, everybody.
Some of you.
Bye.
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 Take care.
Take care.